Hi class, this is Ms. Champagne, and today we're going to talk about the various ways that you can determine slope. The first thing that I need you to do is write these two equations at the top of your paper. You're going to circle this last number. That is the first step. This last number is always your y-intercept. Please write this at the top of your paper. You're going to circle the sign in the middle and the last number for your y-intercept. So y-intercept is -4. I'm going to circle the sign in the middle and the last number here, and this is my y-intercept. The y-intercept means the number on the y-axis that these lines touch. How do we determine which line goes with which equation? We're going to first look at the y-intercept. So when I go down my y line, I should see the line that touches a -4 or a +3. This is a +3 that this black line is touching. So that means that this line matches this equation. On this line, I should see that this black line touches the -4 on my y-axis. So I'm going to take the black line, I'm going to go down. Yes, it does touch -4. So that means that this line matches the first equation. This is the line, this is the equation that matches it. The second thing that you need to do is put a box around your first number, the number that's in front of the x. Put a box around the sign and the numbers that you see in front of your x. This is your slope. This is your slope. Slope tells us how much this line is leaning or slanting. It tells us how much the line is leaning or slanting. There are 3 ways to determine slope. So the first way is to always look at the number that's in front of the x. That will tell you what your slope is. So let's write this down on our notes paper. So I'm going to write slope. And this is kind of blurry, so let me move the light here. So slope is So slope number 1 is always, my lighting is still not right, excuse me. Let's try this. Slope is always a fraction. So slope is always going to be a plus or a minus sign, and then it's going to be a number at the top and a number at the bottom. And this number at the top tells you how many lines you're going to move up. The number at the bottom tells you how many lines you're going to move over. So number 1, slope is always a fraction. Number 2, slope tells us how much the line is leaning. So it tells us how much the line slants or leans. Number 3, slope can be positive if it's pointing toward the top right corner of your paper. Slope can be negative. If it's pointing toward the top left corner of your paper. Slope can be zero if it's a horizontal line. You know that this is a horizontal line. Remember how we used to draw a sun when we were in elementary school? So this sun was rising and setting on this line that we call the horizon. So that's how you can remember that a horizontal line goes from right to left. Slope can also be undefined. We call this slope undefined. And this is, horizontal line is always going to be a y equals some type of number line. Our undefined slope is always going to be an x equals some type of number. Undefined and zero are two totally different things. I think of this as a person that you just see walking down the hall. Can you tell how tall this person is by looking at them? No. No. So we call their slope undefined. They could be 5'1", 5'2", 5'6". I don't know just by looking at that person unless I actually measure them. So if you see a line up and down, it's normally an x equals line, which is a vertical line. And the slope on that line is going to be undefined. So the first way to determine slope is to look at the number in front of x. So for our equations, we had y equals 3x minus 4. So the number in front of the x is always your slope. So that is the first way to determine slope. So the number in front of the x is the slope. The second way to determine slope is that we can look at the graph and count the number of lines up and over, and make sure that you determine whether it's negative or positive. So let's do that first with our graph our two graphs to determine the slope. Let's go back to our two graphs, and we're going to determine the slope by looking at the line and counting up and over. So the first thing with this line, I'm going to put an arrow here. We're going to determine the slope of this line. First of all, I see that this slope is pointing in which direction? So you're going to write positive or negative, and then you're going to write your two numbers for slope. Is this line pointing towards the top right corner? You might want to write this on your paper. Or is it pointing over here towards the top left? This line is pointing towards the top left. That tells me that my slope is going to be negative. So I'm going to circle the negative sign and cross out the positive. Now, I need to choose 2 points on this line. A point is a, excuse me, where the black line touches 4 squares in the middle. This is a point, this is a point. This is a square, this is a square, those 4 squares, and it touches here in the middle. So I'm going to determine how many lines I have to go straight up. That's going to be my first number for slope. That's called the rise, or your x value. I'm sorry. The rise, which is your y value. How many lines it takes to go up. And this is called the run, which is your x value. So from here, and if I'm trying to get from this pencil to my finger, how many lines do I have to go straight up? I'm going to go straight up one line. So 1 is the top number of our slope. And then how many numbers do I have to go over? I go over 1, 2. 2. So, I'm sorry. So, for this line, we see that -1/2 is the slope. For this line over here, we're going to do the same exact thing. So, we're going to draw our plus or negative and our box at the top and our box at the bottom. And we're going to ask ourselves, what direction is this line pointing towards the top right, or is this arrow pointing over here towards the top left? We can clearly see that it's pointing towards the top right. So this is going to be positive. Now we have to determine how many lines do I have to go straight up and over to get from this point to this point over here. So I'm going to count my lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I had to go up 6, so I'm going to put that here for my slope. And then I had to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I had to go over 1, 2. Over 2. And then the last step is to reduce this fraction. In order to reduce this, I have to find out which number in their times table is the same, which factor, and divide by it. So I'm going to put a 6 here and a 2 here, and I'm going to write down their times tables. So I have 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and that's it. Then I have 1 times 2. So I see that 2 is the same in their times table. So 2 is what we call our greatest common factor. We're going to take the number 2 and we're going to divide it by 6, and you divide it by 2. So we have a positive 3. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1 for our slope. We don't have to put the imaginary 1, so slope for that line is equal to 3. So that's the second way that we can determine slope, by looking at the graph and counting the number of lines up and over and determine whether the line pointed towards the right or whether the line was pointing towards the left. The third way to determine slope is to subtract 2 points. So you'll be given 4 numbers, maybe 3, 4, and 5, 7. So this is your X number, this is your Y number, this is your X number, and this is your Y number.